I'm Tessa and I'm 32. I poked at my omelette, trying to laugh it off, but Rachel wasn't having it. You used to light up when you talked about him, she said softly. Now you just look tired. I told her it was just stress from adjusting to married life, but deep down, I knew she was right. The kind of right that sits heavy in your stomach and refuses to go away. 2 weeks later, I found the second red flag. Adrian had always been secretive about his work, but one evening, curiosity got the better of me. He'd left his laptop open on the counter while he took a call in the other room. I shouldn't have looked. Trust me, I know. But something in me needed to understand what had him so consumed. The email at the top of his inbox was from a fertility clinic. At first, I thought maybe he was finally taking steps toward starting a family. My heart actually fluttered with hope, until I opened it and read the words, patient results, negative motility. My breath caught. Negative motility. That wasn't me, it was him. Adrian was the one who couldn't have children, but instead of telling me, he'd spent months deflecting, pretending like I was the one delaying things. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen until his voice startled me. "What are you doing?" He was standing in the doorway, eyes sharp as ice. "You went through my laptop?" "You lied to me," I said, my voice trembling. "You told me we should wait, that the timing wasn't right, but it's because you can't—" "Don't you dare," he snapped, slamming the laptop shut. "You had no right to invade my privacy." "Your privacy," I said, disbelief cutting through the fear. "You've been hiding something that affects both of us." He poured himself a drink, completely calm now. "It doesn't change anything, Summer. There are options, adoption, surrogacy. We'll handle it when the time is right." But his tone was flat, rehearsed, like he'd said the same lines before. I wanted to believe him, to think this was just pride or fear talking, but something in his eyes told me it was more than that. A week later, he scheduled a business trip to London. When he returned, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from someone named M. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. At first, I told myself it was Marcus, his business partner. Then one night, while he was in the shower, the phone lit up again. "Miss you already." My heart sank. I didn't need to open the rest. I knew. The perfect husband, the devoted partner, was having an affair. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. "You don't understand, Summer," he said coldly. "This isn't about love, it's about legacy." "Legacy?" I repeated. "You're cheating on me because you want a legacy." "You can't give me children," he said simply, like he was stating a weather report. I couldn't breathe. The man who'd spent months avoiding intimacy, the man who'd hidden his own infertility, was blaming me for it. That was the night I moved out. I stayed with Rachel for a week before getting my own apartment across town. Adrian called every day at first, alternating between begging and threatening. Then came the email from his lawyer. He was filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences related to fertility. My hand shook as I read it. He was turning his own failure into my fault. I thought it couldn't get worse, but then the court summons arrived, claiming I had violated our prenuptial agreement by concealing a pre-existing medical condition affecting reproductive capability. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. He'd flipped the story completely. Rachel wanted me to go public, to ruin him with the truth, but I needed proof. That's when I remembered the fertility clinic email. He'd deleted it from his laptop, but not before I'd sent a copy to myself. So I hired a lawyer of my own, a quiet, methodical woman named Dana who didn't waste words. "If what you're telling me is true," she said, scanning the document, "he's perjuring himself. Let him dig his own grave." And he did. Over the next few months, Adrian painted himself as the victim. He told anyone who'd listen that his heart was broken, that I'd lied about my ability to have children. The tabloids picked it up. Billionaire betrayed by barren bride. My inbox filled with hate mail from strangers calling me a gold digger, a fraud, a waste of space. I almost broke under the pressure. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered Rachel's voice in my head. You know the truth, Summer. Let him destroy himself with his lies. So I waited. And that's how we got to today. Me sitting in that courtroom, watching my ex-husband wave papers around while the world thought I was the villain. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Christian's lawyer began his final argument, spinning a story so smooth it could have won an Oscar. And then it was my turn. I stood up, reached into my purse, and pulled out a small envelope. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. Before you proceed, I have new evidence to submit. I handed the clerk a printed copy of the email, complete with the clinic's letterhead and Christian's name in bold. The moment he saw it, the color drained from his face. I could practically hear the air leave the room. This, I said clearly, is from the fertility clinic my husband visited 6 months before our wedding. The results show 0 viable sperm count. He knew he was infertile before he married me, and yet he's accusing me of deception. The gallery erupted. Adrian stammered something about doctor-patient confidentiality, but it was too late. The judge's expression had shifted from sympathy to disgust. Mr. Morrison, she said coldly, would you like to explain this? He didn't. He couldn't. He just sat there, jaw tight, mask shattered. For the first time in years, I saw him as he really was. Not a powerful businessman, not a charming husband, but a coward hiding behind his money. As the judge dismissed the case and ordered an investigation into possible perjury, I felt something inside me uncoil. The fear, the shame, the years of walking on eggshells, gone. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, sunlight spilling across the marble floor, and for the first time since meeting Adrian Morrison, I finally felt free. But curiosity and instinct teamed up against my better judgment. The safe door was slightly ajar, and inside was a neatly organized stack of folders labeled with that same cold precision Adrian brought to everything he touched. Contracts, client records, financial statements, and then one manila envelope with a single word written across it in Christian's handwriting, personal. My pulse jumped. I told myself I'd only take a quick peek, that I'd close it before he ever knew I'd been there. But as soon as I unfolded the papers, the world I thought I knew evaporated. Inside were printed emails, not between Adrian and another woman, but between him and Marcus. The earliest ones were about work, profit margins, expansion deals, market forecasts. Then the tone shifted. They started sharing late-night thoughts, private jokes, and messages that felt far too intimate for business partners. Wish you were here instead of her. Counting down the hours until I see you again. My stomach twisted. Each message was a gut punch, confirming what my instincts had been whispering for months. My husband wasn't cheating with another woman. He was in love with his best friend. I dropped the papers like they'd burned me and backed away, heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. My mind spun through every dinner, every trip, every offhand comment that suddenly made awful, perfect sense. The business trips that always included Marcus, the late-night strategy sessions, the lingering looks I'd written off as camaraderie. It wasn't business, it was them. I sat on the edge of the couch until I heard Christian's footsteps in the hallway. I shoved everything back into the safe and forced it shut just before he entered the room. "What are you doing up?" he asked casually, heading for the bar to pour himself a drink. "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "You?" "Working," he said. Like that explained everything. He didn't notice the tremor in my hands or the storm behind my eyes. That night, I lay awake beside him, wondering how long I'd been living as a prop in his carefully curated life. By morning, my sadness had hardened into something else. Resolve. If Adrian could play a long game of deception, then so could I. I started documenting everything. I downloaded copies of his emails, took discreet photos of documents, and quietly gathered proof of his financial misdeeds too. Because where there's emotional betrayal, there's usually something monetary lurking nearby. And I was right. One folder in particular caught my attention, a file detailing a transfer of funds from his company to a private account under Marcus's name. The amount was staggering. Millions. They were funneling money out of the firm like it was their personal piggy bank. So, not only was my husband lying about his love life, he was committing fraud. A perfect power couple, just not the kind that belonged in a business magazine. 2 months later, I confronted him, not with the affair, but with the financial discrepancy. I wanted to see how he'd react when cornered. "Christian," I said one evening, setting down a glass of wine, "why is there a 7-figure transfer from the company's account to Marcus's private fund?" He froze for half a second, then gave a tight laugh. "You've been going through my files again." "Answer the question." "It's a tax maneuver," he said smoothly. "Perfectly legal. Derek is just managing overseas investments for us." "Then why not tell your board?" "Because you wouldn't understand the complexities of it, Summer," he said with that condescending tone I'd come to loathe. "You plan parties, not portfolios." My anger burned hotter than I'd ever felt before. He didn't just underestimate me, he dismissed me entirely. That night, after he fell asleep, I forwarded every incriminating document I had to a secure drive and to my lawyer friend Rachel. "If anything happens to me," I told her over the phone, "release them." "Summer," she said cautiously, "what are you planning?" "The truth," I said. "That's all." In the days that followed, Adrian became increasingly unpredictable. He'd snap at me over nothing, disappear for hours, and come home smelling like Marcus's cologne. Then one morning, I woke up to find him already dressed in his favorite suit, sipping coffee like it was any other day. "We need to talk," he said flatly. "About us." I braced myself. "Go on." "I think it's time we separate," he said, eyes sharp but emotionless. "This marriage isn't working." I almost laughed. This marriage never worked, I thought. Out loud, I said, "Are you sure you want to do this, Christian?" "Completely," he said. "It's for the best." "For you or for Marcus?" His jaw tightened, the only flicker of emotion I'd seen in months. "Don't make this ugly, Summer." "Too late," I said quietly. "You already did." He filed for divorce a week later, but his real goal wasn't freedom, it was control. By painting me as infertile and deceitful, he thought he'd protect his image, his money, and his affair. He didn't realize I already had all the evidence to burn his empire down. When we finally faced each other in that courtroom, he still wore that same confident smirk, the one that said he believed he'd already won. But when I handed over that email from the fertility clinic and watched his composure crack, I knew the game was over. As the judge read the contents aloud, Christian's lawyer went pale. The whispers spread through the courtroom like wildfire. His perfect mask was disintegrating right there in front of the world. I didn't smile, at least not outwardly. I just sat there, calm and composed, while inside, every part of me screamed with vindication. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like his accessory or his project. I felt like me again. After the judge dismissed the case and Adrian stormed out of the courtroom, avoiding every camera, I stepped outside into the sunlight. Reporters shouted questions, microphones flashed, but all I said was, "The truth always finds a way out." That evening, Rachel and I toasted with cheap champagne on her balcony, laughing until we cried. "You know," she said, "you could write a book about this." I smiled. "Maybe I will." The thought lingered as I looked out over the city skyline, because Adrian Morrison had taken enough from me. My story, though, that was mine to tell. Dana met me at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place where nobody cared who you were as long as you tipped well and kept your voice low. She was sharp, mid-40s maybe, with calm eyes that made you feel both exposed and safe at the same time. "Tell me everything," she said, flipping open a leather notebook. So I did. Every suspicion, every lie, every twisted piece of the puzzle that was my marriage to Adrian Morrison. She didn't interrupt once, just nodded occasionally, the way professionals do when they're already 10 steps ahead. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "So, let me get this straight. Your husband had a vasectomy years before he met you, pretended to want children, and then used your supposed infertility as grounds for divorce." "That's exactly it. And you believe he's involved with his business partner." "I don't just believe it," I said. "I've seen the way they look at each other." Dana gave a small, knowing smile. "Then, let's find proof." Over the next few weeks, she moved through Christian's world like a ghost. Security footage, travel logs, business expenses. She found things I never could have imagined, like the corporate retreat in Miami that didn't include a single other employee, just Adrian and Marcus, or the apartment on the Upper West Side, leased under Marcus's name but paid for by Christian's corporate account. When Dana showed me photos of them together at a rooftop bar, hands brushing, faces close in that unmistakable way, I didn't even cry. I just felt a strange calm, like confirmation was a relief after months of suspicion. "What do you want to do with this?" Dana asked quietly. "I want him to see what it feels like to lose everything he thought he could control." She nodded once. "Then we'll do this by the book." And she did. Every document, every photo, every timestamp went into a neat, bulletproof file that could shred Christian's reputation faster than any scandal headline. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances. I smiled at dinner, laughed at parties, and kissed his cheek when Derek dropped by, all while knowing the truth about both of them. The duality of it was exhausting, but it gave me power, a power I hadn't felt since before I'd taken his name. One night, Adrian came home early from the office, unusually cheerful. "You'll never guess what Derek and I closed today," he said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. "A new investor deal." "Bigger," he said. "Legacy Holdings wants to buy a 30% stake in our firm. It'll triple our valuation." I raised my glass. "Congratulations," I said evenly, "to your empire." He smiled, completely oblivious to the irony. "And to us," he added, "to everything we've built together." I forced a laugh and clinked his glass, wondering if he'd ever realize how much of that empire was about to come crashing down because of the woman he'd underestimated. By the time Dana had finished her investigation, I had enough evidence to dismantle Christian's public persona and his company in one clean stroke. But I wasn't interested in revenge. Not yet. I wanted truth, and more importantly, I wanted control of my own story. The opportunity came when Adrian announced he'd be hosting a charity gala to celebrate the firm's success. Hundreds of people, clients, journalists, politicians, would be there. Perfect audience. I told Dana to be ready. That night, I put on the same diamond necklace Adrian had given me on our wedding day, the one he'd said symbolized our forever. I looked in the mirror, steadied my breathing, and reminded myself that forever was about to end very publicly. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and false sincerity. Adrian was in his element, shaking hands, laughing too loud, playing the charming visionary. Derek was never far from his side. When he introduced me to the crowd as the incredible woman who keeps me grounded, I smiled so sweetly it could have curdled milk. The speeches went on, the applause thundered, and just when Adrian raised his glass to toast the power of integrity, I gave Dana the signal. The projector behind the stage flickered. For a second, no one noticed. Then the images appeared. Photos of Adrian and Marcus, on that rooftop bar, holding hands at the beach, checking into the Miami hotel. followed by financial records detailing transfers between their accounts, followed by the fertility clinic's confirmation letter, bold and undeniable on a 20-foot screen. The room went silent. The only sound was the soft clink of someone dropping their glass. Adrian froze mid-sentence, staring at the images like he couldn't believe they were real. Derek went pale. The whispers started, first in the back, then spreading like wildfire. Is that... Oh my God! He lied about everything. The moment stretched like eternity. Finally I stood, my voice calm and clear. Since Adrian has always valued transparency, I thought it only fair to share a few truths he forgot to mention. He turned toward me, eyes wild. Summer, what the hell are you doing? Correcting the record, I said simply. See, while you were busy portraying me as barren and manipulative, you conveniently left out that you had a vasectomy years before we met, or that you've been embezzling company funds to finance your real partnership. Gasps echoed through the room. Security guards began whispering into earpieces. You're destroying everything, he hissed. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. And then I walked out, past the stunned guests, past the reporters already dialing their editors, past the man who'd built an empire of lies and thought he'd never have to answer for them. Dana met me outside, engine running. You ready? She asked. More than ever. We drove away as sirens began wailing in the distance. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Millionaire mogul exposed in double life scandal. Wife reveals husband's secret relationship and financial fraud. His empire crumbled in days. The board removed him, Derek vanished overseas, and every ounce of his charm curdled into infamy. Me? I started over, sold the penthouse, donated half the proceeds to the very charities he'd used for PR, and moved into a quiet apartment with actual sunlight and peace. One morning, Dana called to tell me the investigation had officially closed in my favor. You know, she said, you didn't just survive him, you outplayed him. I smiled. He taught me how. Now, when people ask what happened between Adrian and me, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is also the best thing that ever frees you. Because once you've walked out of the ashes of someone else's lies, you stop being afraid of fire. He smirked, that same infuriating half-smile that had once seemed charming, now dripping with arrogance. Done communicating? You're not making sense, Summer. No, I said evenly. For the first time in years, I finally am. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. I know about Marcus. His smirk vanished, replaced by the faintest twitch in his jaw. What about Marcus? Don't insult my intelligence, I said. I know about the hotel, the dinners, the trips. I know about you and him. The silence between us was deafening. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just stared at me like he was recalibrating his entire strategy. Then, to my shock, he actually laughed. So what? He said finally, his tone icy and detached. You think you've uncovered some grand conspiracy? People cheat, Summer. You'll survive. I took a step closer, my hands trembling, but not from fear. This isn't about cheating. This is about you using me. You married me to protect your reputation, to play the part of the successful, family-oriented man while you carried on your real relationship behind closed doors. You lied about wanting children. You lied about your life. You lied about everything. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. You have no proof? I almost smiled. Actually, I do. His eyes darted toward the safe, then back to me. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. You went through my office. I went through our life, I corrected, and I found the vasectomy records, the ones from 3 years before you even met me. I found your hotel receipts, your financial transfers, everything. Christian's carefully crafted mask cracked, just for a second. Then he straightened his tie and exhaled slowly. You're making a mistake, he said coldly. You think you're the first woman who's felt betrayed in a marriage? Walk away quietly, Summer. I'll make sure you're taken care of, cause a scene, and I'll ruin you. I laughed, a real laugh this time, the kind that comes from pure disbelief. Ruin me? You already did that when you made me believe I was broken, when you let me sob in our bathroom, thinking I was the reason we couldn't have kids while you knew the truth. His voice softened suddenly, feigned pity leaking into his tone. Summer, you're overreacting. You're hurt, I get it. But let's be reasonable. We can spin this. No one needs to know about Marcus. I can protect you from the fallout if you just... No, I cut in sharply. You don't get to protect me. Not anymore. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Be careful, Summer. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I said, backing toward the door. A liar, a coward, and a man who's about to learn what happens when the woman he underestimated stops playing nice. I left his office before he could say another word. That night I called Sarah. It's done, I said. He knows. Then it's time, she replied. Are you ready? I've been ready for months. The following week was a blur of quiet planning. Dana helped me move my money out of our joint accounts and into my private one. I started forwarding every piece of evidence she'd collected to a secure drive under her name. I met with my attorney, Dana, who assured me the prenup could be challenged on the grounds of fraud and emotional manipulation. He deceived you about something material to the marriage, she said firmly. That's grounds for nullification. You'll walk away with more than he ever expected. Meanwhile, Adrian carried on as if nothing had changed. He still left for the gym with Derek every morning, still came home late, still smiled for the cameras whenever we attended public events together. It was surreal, living in the same house with a man who had no idea his empire was about to collapse. On the surface, I played my part perfectly. I laughed at his jokes, attended charity dinners, posted the occasional photo on social media, all while quietly dismantling the life he'd built on my back. Every time I looked at him, I felt less like a victim and more like a storm waiting to break. Then came the night he made his final mistake. I'd been out to dinner with Rachel, decompressing, when I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo, Adrian and Marcus, arm in arm, outside a restaurant in the village, kissing under a streetlight. Below it, one line. Thought you should see what your husband's up to tonight. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. Who is this? The reply came seconds later. Someone who thinks you deserve better. My heart pounded as I slid my phone into my purse. I didn't need to ask for proof anymore. The universe had just handed me confirmation and an opportunity. When I got home that night, Adrian was already there, pouring whiskey like nothing in the world could touch him. You're late, he said, not even looking up. So are you, I replied. He froze, glass halfway to his lips. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said calmly, that I'm filing for divorce first thing in the morning. You're not serious. Dead serious. His eyes darkened, the charming mask giving way to pure fury. You think you can just leave me, after everything I've given you? Given me, I repeated, my voice rising. You gave me lies, humiliation, and a front-row seat to your affair. You gave me a marriage built on manipulation. Congratulations, Christian. You've outdone yourself. He slammed his glass onto the counter, shattering it. You'll regret this. I doubt it, I said, turning toward the door. You're done controlling me. From now on, I answer to no one but myself. That night, I packed my bags and left the penthouse. I didn't look back. The city lights blurred through the cab window as I realized something profound. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I'd simply been caged. And now that the cage was open, I wasn't just escaping. I was coming for everything he'd stolen from me. My peace, my dignity, and the truth. By morning, I'd filed for divorce. By evening, the first cracks in Christian's perfect world had begun to show. His lawyer called mine. His PR team scrambled to control the damage, and Derek disappeared from the public eye. But me? I finally exhaled. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was surviving someone else's story. I was writing my own. When he finally looked up, his tone was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Morrison, are you aware of the contents of this file?" Adrian cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. "Your Honor, this is clearly an invasion of privacy and has no relevance to—" "Sit down, Mr. Morrison," Judge Ellsworth interrupted. The authority in his voice made even the gallery fall silent. Christian's lawyer tried to object, but the judge held up a hand. "I've read enough to determine that this so-called infertility claim is false. In fact, it appears that you, Mr. Morrison, underwent a vasectomy several years before your marriage. Is that correct?" The color drained completely from Christian's face. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For a man who always had the perfect line ready, he was suddenly speechless. "Your Honor, if I may," his lawyer started, but the judge cut him off again. "No, you may not. I'm reading a medical confirmation signed by a licensed physician. Your client's deception nullifies the prenuptial agreement under fraudulent pretense." The gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters scribbled notes so fast you could hear the pens scratching across their pads. Victoria leaned toward me, whispering, "You just won the case." I didn't smile. Not yet. I watched Adrian instead. He was gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white, as his empire, his image, crumbled right there in front of everyone. Judge Ellsworth continued, "Furthermore, this evidence indicates not only a deliberate attempt to defraud Mrs. Morrison, but also a breach of marital trust that goes far beyond mere incompatibility." Adrian finally found his voice. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "She's trying to destroy my reputation because she couldn't handle being—" "Enough," the judge said firmly. "Mr. Morrison, you built this case on lies. Lies to this court, lies to your spouse, and apparently lies to yourself." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Morrison, you have my sympathies. What you've endured is unconscionable." I nodded politely, though sympathy wasn't what I'd come for. I came for justice. Victoria stood. "Your Honor, given the evidence of fraud, we move to dissolve the prenuptial agreement and request full financial disclosure from the defendant's holdings." "Granted," Judge Ellsworth said without hesitation. Christian's lawyer tried to protest, but the judge's gavel hit the desk like a gunshot. "Motion approved. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to determine spousal restitution and damages." As I returned to my seat, Adrian leaned toward me, his voice a low hiss. "You think you've won? You've just declared war." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Christian. You declared war when you decided to make me the enemy in my own marriage." Cameras flashed as we exited the courthouse, reporters shouting questions about betrayal, fraud, and the mysterious business partner named Marcus. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By the time I got home, the story had already gone viral. Every news outlet ran with it. Millionaire investor, accused of fraud and marital deception. The financial world was devouring him alive. That night, Victoria called. "He's panicking," she said. "His PR team's trying to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the records you provided are airtight." "Good," I said. "Let him feel what panic tastes like." "You realize," she added gently, "that you could take him for half his assets, maybe more." "I don't want half," I said. "I want the truth on record. Everything he built, everything he stood for, was a lie. I just want people to see that." Over the next few days, my phone didn't stop ringing. News networks wanted interviews, podcasts wanted exclusives, magazines wanted photo spreads. I ignored them all. The last thing I wanted was fame for being the woman who brought down Adrian Morrison. I wanted closure, but Adrian wasn't done. He showed up at my apartment 3 nights later, unannounced, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "No, we don't." "Summer, please, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let him in. He paced the living room like a trapped animal, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair that now looked anything but. "You've ruined me," he said finally. "Everything I've worked for, gone." "You ruined yourself," I said quietly. "You chose deceit over honesty. You treated people like pawns, and now the board flipped." "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "Derek and I—" "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't insult me by pretending it was love. If you loved him, you wouldn't have needed me to play your cover story." "I needed you," he said bitterly. "You were safe, polished. You made me look legitimate." The honesty hit harder than any lie ever could. "Then you should have hired a publicist, not married me." He flinched. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching me fall apart?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm watching you finally face consequences." He stared at me for a long time, his expression shifting between anger and something that almost looked like regret. "You'll regret this too," he said. "They'll dig into your life. They'll twist it. You'll be the villain by next week." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll be the truthful one." I opened the door, signaling the conversation was over. "Goodbye, Christian." He hesitated, then walked out without another word. The silence that followed felt heavier than his presence ever had. 2 weeks later, we were back in court for the final hearing. Adrian looked smaller somehow, deflated, while Victoria stood tall beside me. The judge reviewed the financial disclosures and ruled decisively in my favor. I would receive restitution, half the marital assets, and sole ownership of the penthouse. But the real victory came when Judge Ellsworth added, "Given the nature of the deceit, the court recommends a full investigation into Morrison Investment Group for potential financial misconduct." Christian's lawyer tried to object, but it was over. The gavel fell for the last time. Outside, the reporters were waiting again, microphones raised. "Mrs. Morrison, do you have any comment on today's ruling?" I stopped, took a breath, and met their eyes. "Yes," I said. "When someone builds their success on lies, the truth isn't revenge, it's justice, and justice always wins." The flash of cameras lit up the courthouse steps, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't the broken woman he'd tried to make me. I was the storm that swept through his empire and left truth standing in its place. That night, I sat by my apartment window with a glass of wine, watching the city glow. Somewhere out there, Adrian was probably plotting his next move, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I'd faced the man who built my prison and walked out free. The scars would fade, the noise would quiet, but the lesson would stay. Never let someone convince you that your worth depends on their approval. Because the moment you stop believing their lies, you start writing your own story, and mine was just beginning. By the end of the week, their firm's board of directors had voted to suspend both of them, pending an internal investigation. It was a polite way of saying they'd been exiled from their own empire. The story dominated the headlines for days. Every major business outlet ran variations of the same theme, the fall of Adrian Morrison. When image becomes illusion. The tabloids, of course, were less subtle. Billionaire's secret lover exposed. Wife's revenge stuns Wall Street. Everywhere I went, people whispered, some out of pity, others out of awe. But I didn't care. I hadn't set out to destroy Christian. I'd only wanted the truth to surface. He'd done the rest all by himself. Meanwhile, Derek vanished completely. One day he was in every magazine alongside Christian. The next he was a ghost. Rumors swirled that he'd fled to Europe, that he was in rehab, that he was suing Adrian for emotional distress. I didn't bother verifying any of it. Whatever version of the truth existed between them was no longer my concern. What mattered was that I was free. The legal settlement came through faster than anyone expected. Victoria handled the final paperwork, while Christian's legal team, now half its original size, scrambled to salvage what they could. He was forced to liquidate some assets to cover my share, which the media gleefully reported as a divorce fire sale. Watching the empire he'd built on deceit collapse piece by piece should have felt triumphant, but instead, it felt like justice, quiet, steady, inevitable. The day the funds hit my account, I stood at my bank's marble counter, signing the transfer documents with hands that didn't shake. My entire future was now secure, independent, and entirely mine. No man's name on the account, no shared access, no hidden clauses, just freedom. Later that evening, Victoria joined me for a drink at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. "You know," she said, clinking her glass against mine, "in 15 years of practicing family law, I've never seen a man implode this spectacularly." I laughed softly. "He built his own guillotine and handed me the rope. And you pulled it with style," she said with a grin. Then her expression softened. "So what now, Summer? You've got money, your name cleared, your independence back. What's next?" I looked out at the skyline, the same city where I'd once felt so small, now shining like a promise. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it'll be on my terms." The following weeks were strange, the kind of calm that feels almost foreign after years of chaos. The penthouse, now legally mine, felt different, lighter. I replaced the cold modern furniture Adrian had chosen with pieces that actually felt like home. I turned his office into a studio space, filled it with plants and sunlight. For the first time, the place stopped feeling like a museum of his ego and started feeling like my sanctuary. The tabloids eventually moved on to their next scandal, but the ripples of Christian's downfall lingered. He tried to salvage his reputation with a carefully worded statement about private struggles and misunderstandings, but the public wasn't buying it. The damage was permanent. Investors backed out, clients fled, and soon Morrison Investment Group filed for restructuring under new management, none of which included Adrian or Marcus. Karma, it seemed, had an excellent sense of timing. About a month after the final hearing, I got an email from Christian. Just one line. "Are you happy now?" I stared at it for a long time before replying. Yes. I hit send and immediately blocked his address. Closure doesn't always come with grand speeches or dramatic finales. Sometimes it's just a single word that means you've finally stopped caring. Life began to move forward in ways I hadn't expected. Rachel convinced me to take a week-long spa retreat upstate. To detox from the male toxicity, as she put it. For the first time in forever, I slept through the night without waking to anxiety or resentment. I walked through the woods, journaled, rediscovered what peace felt like when it wasn't something I had to earn by pleasing someone else. When I returned to Manhattan, I felt reborn. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping others navigate legal separation and financial abuse. My story spread quietly among the residents, not as gossip, but as hope. "You got out," one woman whispered to me once. "You actually got out." "Yeah," I said, "and so will you." I didn't realize it at first, but that was the real victory. Not the money, not the penthouse, not even the public vindication. It was reclaiming my voice and using it to help others find theirs. About 3 months after the verdict, I got another message, this time from Dana Chen, my private investigator. She sent a brief update. Derek had resurfaced in London, working at a smaller firm under a different name. Christian, however, had left the country entirely. "Rumor says he's in Dubai," her message read. "No extradition treaties, probably trying to rebuild under the radar." I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. Let him rebuild. Just make sure he never builds another prison for anyone else. Dana responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I smiled. For once, justice didn't need a final confrontation. The final act of this story came quietly one morning, 6 months later. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news, when a small headline caught my eye. Former financier Adrian Morrison declared bankrupt after fraud investigation expands. Apparently, The corporate audit had uncovered years of creative accounting, offshore transfers, and misappropriated client funds. It was the financial equivalent of a confession. My ex-husband was officially broke. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just closed the article, finished my coffee, and went back to my day. Because real freedom isn't about watching someone else lose. It's about finally winning back yourself. Months later, standing on that same courthouse step where I'd once faced the cameras, I realized I'd come full circle. Not as the woman they pitied, not as the scandalized wife, but as someone stronger than the storm that tried to drown her. I'd thought the courtroom victory was the end of my story, but it turned out to be just the beginning. Because when the world tries to define you by your scars, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show them off and say, "This is where I healed." They wanted to work with the company led by the woman who'd exposed one of Wall Street's biggest scandals and still had the audacity to rebuild from the ashes. We weren't selling investments anymore. We were selling redemption, resilience, and reinvention. And people love a comeback story. Monica and I spent long nights in the office, surrounded by spreadsheets, coffee cups, and takeout containers, building new strategies that focused on ethical investing and transparency. The exact opposite of how Adrian had operated. "You know," Monica said one night, looking up from her laptop, "the irony is that your scandal might end up being the best PR this company ever got." "I've thought about that," I said. "Maybe sometimes destruction is just another form of cleansing." We both laughed, but there was truth in it. The more I learned about Christian's world, the endless deceit, the performative ethics, the obsession with image, the more I realized his collapse wasn't a tragedy. It was inevitable. The difference was, I was determined to rebuild something that actually deserved to exist. 6 months after the rebrand, we landed our first major institutional investor, a clean energy fund out of Boston that had been hesitant to work with us at first, but admired our commitment to transparency. That one deal changed everything. Word spread that Meridian Capital Partners was back on its feet, not because of shady deals or smoke and mirrors, but because of integrity. Within a year, we'd gone from near bankruptcy to turning a profit. When Forbes reached out requesting an interview, I hesitated. The idea of putting my face back in the public eye after everything made my stomach twist. But Monica was right. This was our chance to control the narrative. The interview took place in my office, overlooking Central Park, the same view Adrian had once used as a backdrop for his power plays. "You've managed to rebuild a company that everyone assumed was finished," the journalist said. "How did you do it?" I smiled, keeping my voice calm and even. "By remembering that reputation is built on trust, not appearances. My ex-husband built his empire on illusion. I built mine on truth. It's a slower process, but it lasts longer." The piece ran the following month under the headline, "The Phoenix of Wall Street: How Tessa Morrison Rebuilt the Empire. Her Husband Destroyed." It went viral within hours. Messages poured in from women across the country, entrepreneurs, professionals, single mothers, all telling me how my story gave them courage to walk away from toxic relationships or start over after failure. That meant more to me than any stock price or corporate victory ever could. Of course, success came with its own shadows. Adrian wasn't done trying to haunt me. I started receiving anonymous emails, veiled threats about lawsuits, accusations of corporate theft, warnings that I'd regret humiliating him. Victoria traced them back to a private server registered overseas. Christian's last desperate attempt at control. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked. "No," I said. "Let him scream into the void. The world stopped listening to him a long time ago." A few weeks later, I heard from Dana Chen, the investigator who had helped me uncover the truth. "Thought you should know," she said over the phone. "Christian's been spotted in Zurich. He's broke, but he's trying to pitch a new venture, some offshore trading scheme. Nobody's biting." "Good," I said. He can sell his fantasies somewhere far away from here. After that, I didn't think about him much. My life had expanded beyond the narrow orbit of his ego. I traveled for business, spoke at conferences about ethical finance, and even started a foundation supporting women starting over after financial or emotional abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very marriage that once made me feel powerless had given me the insight to empower others. One night, as I was leaving the office late, I found myself standing in the boardroom where I'd once sat across from men who doubted me. The city lights reflected off the glass table, and for a moment, I could almost see my old self, the version of me who'd been terrified, unsure, waiting for someone else to define her worth. "You did it," I whispered to her. "You took back your story." The door opened behind me, and Monica poked her head in. "You ready? The car's here." "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Let's go." That night, Meridian Capital was being honored at a gala for corporate transformation, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged in the world I'd built. As I stood on stage accepting the award, the applause washed over me, but my thoughts drifted back to the courtroom, the moment everything began to unravel. It struck me how sometimes life doesn't fall apart to destroy you. It falls apart to push you toward who you're supposed to become. When I returned home after the event, I stood on the penthouse balcony, staring out at the skyline. The same city that had once witnessed my humiliation was now witnessing my triumph. Somewhere out there, Adrian might still be scheming, still clinging to whatever illusions he had left, but it didn't matter anymore. His story was over. Mine was just beginning. I raised a glass of champagne to the night sky. "Here's to starting over," I murmured. "Here's to finally living." The wind caught my hair, the city lights flickered below, and for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt completely, utterly free. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds, broken only by the faint sound of his unsteady breathing. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You really hate me that much?" "No," I said truthfully. "If I hated you, I'd have let you destroy yourself and walked away. But this is justice. You used me, lied to me, and humiliated me. Owning what you built isn't revenge, Christian. It's balance." He exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "You'll never keep it afloat without me." "Funny," I said. "That's what everyone thought about me after you left. Turns out, underestimating me is a habit you never quite kicked." He didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I thought he'd hung up. Then came his final words, soft but bitter enough to linger. "Enjoy it while it lasts." "I intend to," I said, and hung up before he could twist the knife again. When I set the phone down, I realized my hands weren't shaking. For the first time in years, talking to him hadn't filled me with dread or anger, just an odd, serene finality. That chapter of my life was over, and I had closed it on my own terms. A week later, Monica and I hosted a press conference announcing that Meridian Capital Partners had acquired Morrison Investment Group. The room buzzed with curiosity and speculation. Journalists packed the seats, cameras flashing as I stepped up to the podium. 2 years ago, I began, this company represented everything that was wrong with modern finance: greed, deception, and a complete disregard for integrity. Today, it represents something else entirely: renewal, accountability, a reminder that even the worst mistakes can lead to better things if you're willing to learn from them. The applause that followed was polite but genuine. For once, I wasn't a scandal headline. I was a symbol of resilience, and it felt incredible. When the event ended, a young reporter approached me. She couldn't have been more than 25, her notepad clutched tightly in her hand. "Mrs. Morrison, sorry, Ms. Morrison," she corrected quickly. "Can I ask something personal? How did you keep going when everything fell apart?" I smiled, remembering the night spent crying on my bathroom floor, the days I'd walked through boardrooms pretending to be fearless when I was anything but. Because I finally realized falling apart wasn't the end, I said. It was the beginning. Sometimes the only way out of a lie is to build something true. Her eyes shone, and I knew she understood exactly what I meant. The story went global within days. Every major outlet covered the acquisition, calling it the ultimate full-circle moment. Business Insider ran the headline, "From Betrayed Wife to Wall Street Powerhouse." CNBC called me the woman who turned scandal into strategy. For once, I didn't mind the attention. It wasn't pity this time, it was respect. Behind the scenes, the integration process began immediately. Most of the old staff had already jumped ship, but a few loyal employees stayed, cautiously hopeful about the company's rebirth. I met with each of them personally, wanting them to understand that this wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding something real. "We can't erase what happened," I told them during our first meeting, "but we can write the next chapter differently." And we did. Within months, the merged company began turning profits again under its new identity, Meridian Capital Holdings. The irony was poetic. The ashes of Christian's deceit had become the foundation of my legacy. Late one night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in the old Morrison boardroom, now redesigned with open windows and natural light, instead of the sterile, closed-off space Adrian had preferred. On the wall hung a new plaque with a simple inscription, "Integrity builds empires that last." I traced the words with my fingers and felt something shift inside me. Not vengeance, not pride, but peace. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Monica poked her head in, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "For the woman who bought her ex-husband's company just to run it better," she said with a grin. I laughed, accepting a glass. "You make it sound so petty." "Petty?" She raised an eyebrow. "No, that was poetic justice wrapped in business acumen." We clinked glasses and looked out at the skyline glowing through the windows. "You know," Monica said after a moment, "most people would have taken the settlement and disappeared to some beach. But you stayed. You rebuilt. Why?" I thought about that for a moment. Because walking away would have meant he still defined me. Rebuilding meant I defined myself. She nodded. "Well, consider yourself redefined." The next morning, I arrived at the office early, long before the others. Sunlight streamed across the marble floors, and the city below buzzed with possibility. I sat at my desk, and opened the first email of the day. It was from Dana Chen. "He's left Zurich. Rumor is, he's gone off-grid in South America. No assets, no investors, no reputation left. Thought you'd want to know." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Thank you, Sarah. I wish him peace, even if he'll never wish the same for me." When I hit send, it felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. That afternoon, I called a meeting with my executive team. We discussed expansion plans, new initiatives, and potential partnerships. As we wrapped up, Monica turned to me and said, "You realize what today marks, right?" I frowned. "What?" "Exactly 3 years since the day you walked into that courtroom." I blinked, letting that sink in. 3 years since I'd been labeled the barren wife of a cheating millionaire. 3 years since I'd been humiliated, gaslighted, and underestimated. "Feels like a lifetime ago," I said. "No," Monica corrected gently. "Feels like a different life." That night, I walked home through the city streets, passing restaurants where Adrian and I used to dine, shops where I used to window browse while pretending everything was fine. The ghosts didn't haunt me anymore. They simply reminded me how far I'd come. When I reached the penthouse, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city and whispered to the skyline, "Thank you for breaking me." Because without that breaking, I never would have learned how to build myself back stronger. The wind carried my words away, blending them with the hum of the city. And for the first time in years, I felt like they belonged to the air instead of to him. When I told James, he looked stunned for half a heartbeat, then broke into a grin that lit up the entire room. "Are you serious?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was afraid to break the moment. I nodded, still in disbelief myself. "2 tests," I said, holding them up like evidence. "Both positive." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms, laughing and crying all at once. "You have no idea how happy this makes me," he said into my hair. "You deserve this, Summer. You deserve everything." For a moment I couldn't speak. The years of pain, gaslighting, and self-doubt crashed over me like a wave, followed by something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Real peace. "You know what's crazy?" I finally managed, laughing through tears. "I spent years thinking I was broken, that something was wrong with me. Turns out the only thing broken was the person who convinced me of that." Caleb brushed a tear from my cheek and smiled. "Then let's build something whole." The months that followed were a blur of doctor appointments, nursery planning, and cautious excitement. Every time I saw that little heartbeat flicker on the ultrasound screen, it felt like a personal victory against every lie Adrian had ever told. The pregnancy wasn't easy. I had my share of morning sickness, swollen ankles, and midnight cravings for the weirdest combinations of food. But I loved every second of it. Caleb was there through it all, steady and supportive in a way I hadn't realized was possible. When I complained about swollen feet, he rubbed them without a word. When I woke up at 3 a.m. craving pancakes, he made them from scratch. He even came with me to my board meetings, quietly sitting in the back and smiling whenever I glanced his way. He wasn't intimidated by my success or my history. He respected it. It was strange, being loved without condition, without performance, without fear. Word eventually reached Christian, of course. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that he'd seen a tabloid photo of me at a charity event, visibly pregnant, standing next to James. Apparently, he'd gone quiet after that. No angry emails, no snide remarks through lawyers, no last-ditch attempts to contact me. Just silence. Maybe finally, he understood that the power he'd once held over me was gone for good. On a warm afternoon in May, I went into labor. Caleb was in surgery when I called him, and he sprinted across the hospital, still in his scrubs, arriving just as our son entered the world. The nurse handed me a tiny crying bundle, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely whole. "Welcome to the world, little one," Caleb whispered, his voice breaking. We named him Noah Caleb Blake, strong, simple, honest, everything I wanted my life to be now. In the weeks after Noah's birth, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. There had been a time when I couldn't imagine life beyond Christian's shadow, when I believed I'd been permanently damaged by his betrayal. But here I was, running a thriving company, in a healthy relationship, holding a child I'd been told I'd never have. I didn't just survive, I'd transformed. One evening, as I rocked Noah to sleep, I looked around the nursery. Soft light, quiet music, walls painted a gentle shade of blue, and realized that this was what happiness really looked like. Not luxury or status or perfection, but peace. The kind that comes when you've walked through fire and come out stronger for it. Monica visited a few weeks later, holding Noah like he was made of glass. "You really did it," she said softly. "You got everything back that they tried to take from you, and more." I smiled, watching my son's tiny chest rise and fall. "Not everything," I said, "just what mattered." A year later, Meridian Capital Partners had doubled in size, and we opened a new division focused on family-oriented investments, trust funds, education plans, and support for working parents. I named it the Phoenix Fund. When reporters asked why, I said, because rebirth isn't just about surviving what destroys you, it's about choosing what comes next. Sometimes, when I walk into the office, I catch sight of my reflection in the glass, confident, calm, a woman who built an empire from ruins. and I think of that courtroom years ago, of the sterile air, the pitying looks, the man who once thought he could define my worth. He's somewhere out there, probably still blaming me for his downfall. But that's the thing about truth. It doesn't need revenge. It just needs time. One day, your lies collapse under their own weight, and what's left standing is the person who refused to break. I tuck Noah into bed each night and whisper, "You were my miracle." Because he was. Not just for existing, but for proving that broken things can grow again. For reminding me that real strength doesn't come from control. It comes from letting go. So yes, I own it all now. The company, the legacy, the peace. But the greatest thing I'll ever own is the life I built after losing everything. And this time, it's all mine. Caleb had been patient in every way that mattered. With my hesitation, my need for space, my fear of losing myself again in someone else's shadow. He never pushed, never demanded, just stood quietly beside me while I figured out how to trust again. When I talked about someday wanting a family, he only smiled and said, "Someday sounds good. When you're ready." Apparently, someday had arrived early and without warning. "Summer?" he called from the bedroom, his voice warm with concern. "You've been in there a while. Everything okay?" I opened the door, still clutching the test, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Caleb looked from my face to the test and froze, reading the answer before I said it aloud. "Are you—" he began, the question hanging in the air between us, careful, waiting, respectful. "I'm pregnant," I whispered. The words felt unreal, fragile, like they belonged to someone else's life. After everything, after Christian's lies, after all the years I believed something was wrong with me, I'm actually pregnant. For a moment, Caleb just stared, his expression caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. Then he closed the space between us and pulled me into his arms, holding me like something sacred. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," I admitted, "and happy, and vindicated. It's like the universe finally decided to even the score." He laughed softly, that deep, genuine sound that always grounded me. Then I guess the universe has good timing. 9 months later, on a snowy Tuesday morning in February, our daughter came into the world, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a head full of dark hair and James's determined chin. We named her Grace Evelyn Blake, and the first time she opened her eyes, I understood what victory really looked like. It wasn't court rulings or company takeovers. It wasn't watching a man like Adrian lose everything he'd built on deceit. True victory was this, the tiny heartbeat against my chest, the warmth of a love that wasn't conditional or performative, the quiet, knowing that I'd survived everything designed to destroy me and still found a way to create life. Those first months were a blur of sleepless nights, soft lullabies, and quiet gratitude. Every time I looked at Emma, I thought about the irony of it all. A man had once stood in a courtroom and called me sterile. And now here I was, holding the most perfect proof that he'd been wrong about everything. Not just my body, but my spirit. When Grace was 6 months old, Caleb proposed. No grand gesture, no extravagant ring, just his grandmother's worn gold band and a quiet promise in our kitchen while I rocked Grace to sleep. "I don't want to impress anyone," he said, his voice steady. "I just want to be the man who earns your trust every day for the rest of our lives." I said yes without hesitation. We married that Tessa in the penthouse garden, the same place that had once been filled with cold parties and shallow laughter. This time, it was small, intimate, full of warmth. Monica stood beside me as my maid of honor. Dana Chen was there too, smiling, like someone who'd seen the ending coming long before I had. Caleb looked at me like I was the only person in the world. When we said our vows, it wasn't about ownership or image. It was about choosing peace over pride, love over fear. As for Adrian and Derek, they were nowhere near our guest list. I'd heard through business circles that they'd moved to Portland. Derek had opened a small investment advisory firm, and Christian, the once revered mogul, was now a mid-level analyst working under people half his age. They were living together, finally honest about who they were, though not about what they'd done. Their reputations never recovered. For years, Adrian had built an empire on the illusion of perfection. In the end, the truth had done what I never could. Stripped away everything false until all that remained was the man beneath, ordinary and unremarkable. I don't think of him with hate anymore. If anything, I feel grateful. Because without the lies, without the pain, without the humiliation that forced me to rebuild from nothing, I might never have found the version of myself that stands here now, whole, grounded, and free. Sometimes, life doesn't give you happy endings. It gives you clean slates. Now, when I walk into the boardroom, holding Grace in one arm and my presentation notes in the other, I see the reflection of a woman who learned that survival isn't about avoiding pain. It's about transforming it. Meridian Capital continues to thrive. Our Phoenix Fund helps women rebuild after financial or emotional collapse. Every time we sign a new partnership, I think about how many summers are out there. Women who've been told they're broken when really, they're just waiting to rise. And when I tuck Grace into bed at night, I whisper, "You are proof that no one defines your worth but you." So if you're watching this, and you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or told you couldn't do something, remember this: sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rebuilding so beautifully that the people who tried to break you don't even recognize the person you've become. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Because every story of betrayal can become a story of rebirth. And sometimes, the people who doubt us most are the ones who hand us the map to our greatest victories.